Hi, this is Dr. Tony Cooper, and this is Life Without Baggage. In this podcast, I'll help you develop a stronger sense of self, develop firmer boundaries, and also learn how to lean into the gentle promptings of the Holy Spirit who can help you navigate life. My purpose is to help you get free from the emotional baggage that weighs you down so that you can be fully alive and engaged in life. My media includes audiobooks, self-help books, videos, and this podcast. Just a reminder before we get into today's episode that this is not a substitute for medication or counseling. If you're having thoughts of harming yourself or another person, or if this material triggers you, please contact your doctor or a mental health specialist to help you with your concerns. I've been a guest recently on the podcast Juggling Life, Finding Balance with Vivian Cummins. So I answer a lot of questions about boundaries, what they are, why we need them, how it creates peace and order in our lives, and simple ways to set boundaries that don't involve conflict or big, lengthy discussions. They're just very simple, practical things you can do to start to take charge of your boundaries. So this is a chapter from my book, Anxiety, Depression, and Helplessness, Keys to Break Free. So I hope you'll consider picking up a copy of the book. So here's today's episode. Sometimes people are going to give us a little backlash. That doesn't mean you're wrong, and that you have to be careful because a lot of people go into guilt. Oh, maybe I'm not being fair. Maybe, it's like you need to respect yourself.
Okay, so today's topic is all about healthy boundaries. Such an important topic when we're talking about relationships. And my guest today is Dr. Tony Cooper. Dr. Cooper is a psychologist and author of 7 books, and she's also a public speaker. She's in private practice at Wellspring Counseling Center in Ohio, and since 1986, she's been teaching adults the strategies to grow emotionally, build healthy relationships, and heal from trauma. This is a good one, y'all, so settle in and let's get to it. Well, welcome, Dr. Cooper, and thank you so much for being here today and talking to me about boundaries. So if you would, I would love for you to explain to us what exactly are boundaries and why would you say they are essential for those healthy relationships?
Okay, sure. So boundaries are basically limits. And if you think about it, when you drive on the highway, there's a speed limit. It tells you what's okay, what's too much. The lanes are painted so you know this is safe. There are rules for how to change lanes. When you buy a property, there are lines around the property of what's yours, what is somebody else's. There's a door on your house. That's a boundary. There are rooms inside your house. Many of them have doors. Those are boundaries. So boundaries basically are just like limits. This is where something changes and becomes something else. This is where something becomes unsafe.
That's so good. Yeah, everything has a boundary around it, pretty much.
Mhm,
Now that you've
mhm.
mentioned that, I'm thinking everything in life has a boundary.
It does. And so boundaries create peace, they create order, they're a form of protection. So that's why they're essential.
hmm So I've heard people sometimes say that they put up walls when they're talking about boundaries. So is there like a difference between putting up a wall in a relationship and setting a boundary in a relationship?
Yeah, I think there is a difference. A wall is basically, you could say, a defense. It usually comes out of hurt or anger. A boundary is different. I mean, you can have both a wall and a boundary, but a boundary is more just, it's peaceful, it's common sense, it's orderly. So if someone repeatedly crosses your boundaries, you might have a wall. Now, you want to work on any attitude that is not good for you if you need the wall. Like your garage, you put the door down, that's a wall. And there are times it goes up, there are times it goes down. But if something's healthy, you know when you should be open and you're able to control that. And you know when you need to be more protective and you're able to go back and forth. That would be a good way to think about what's healthy. If your walls are always up, that isn't good. If your walls are always down and you trust everybody, you're like a bullseye. So, the flexibility is really useful. Flexible in terms of with different people, you can adjust to what makes sense. Or if something bad happens, you know how to take care of yourself. So the flexibility is really part of what makes it healthy.
So this is a personal question, actually, because so we moved from Utah to the state of California. It's been 3 years now. And because I'm a remote employee, I work from home. It's been really hard for me to meet people and have relationships because I work 10-hour days, and in the evenings I'm tired, so there's not a lot of energy for me to go out and meet all these people. But I have met a couple of people, but I did have one of these friends tell me that I have put up walls. And I was like, I wonder what that could look like. So just out of curiosity, if someone has come to you like in this sense and said, you know what, I feel like you've put up walls, how can I analyze that within myself to see, what I might be projecting towards people? Is it that there's boundaries, or have I really put up walls?
Well, I think I would have, I don't know if you asked the person, what do you mean, or can you give me an example? Because it might be true, but with a wall, we don't let people get to know us. We don't let them close. We shouldn't let everybody, into our inner world. That's not good either. But if nobody really gets close to you and you're guarded, then that would be too many walls.
Yeah. I think that's really good. And I appreciate you giving me a little advice here because, before we left and moved here, there was a season where we kind of did lose some friends, and that was very painful, And so I'm gonna take that back and kind of think through that because very well could be that I might have built a few little walls there.
Yeah, and if we've been hurt, we might be a little bit slower to let people in. So there's nothing wrong with that. And I do think different parts of the world, different states in the United States, there's different norms, really.
So, can you walk us through what the different types of boundaries that people might need to set for themselves?
Absolutely. So if you think about it, we only have so much time. So we maybe want to prioritize and think about how we're using our time. We only have so much money. So how much money are we going to invest in ourselves, in our business, in our adult children, in our grandchildren? Some people really do not do a good job of protecting their own finances, and they're kind of used like a bank or an ATM. We only have so much affection. And so all of these things periodically, if something is painful, if something changes, then we have to kind of readjust. What am I doing with the time, with the affection, with the finances that God has given me? And periodically, those are going to shift a little bit. And I hear more and more trends of adults whose adult children are maybe still in the nest and need to go, or are out of the nest, but they're not making responsible decisions.
Yeah.
And so if you are prone to guilt, if you are a very overly compassionate person and it's not balanced with kind of that wisdom, Jesus said, be wise as a serpent and innocent as a dove. Many of the Christians I know, male and female, have the dove part down, but they don't have the wise as serpents part. And I actually looked this up in my quiet time this week, Viv, And that wise means sensible, but it also means looking out for one's own interests. And so many times Christians get confused and their boundaries are off because they have this distorted view of what a Christian is. They feel guilty if they say no, and they don't take care of themselves, and they become really a doormat, or they become an enabler. And if we make excuses for people a lot, that is a good indicator that you are not using wisdom. You are allowing someone to invade your boundary. We have a choice. So if our boundaries are crossed on a regular basis, we are responsible to adjust the boundary. And you don't need a big conflict to do it. That's the other thing people are afraid of. You don't need a big come to Jesus talk. You can just say, hey, my income is changing, and as of January 1st, I'm not going to be able to provide as much financially for you as I have. So I'm just giving you the heads up that it's going to be this amount, or it's going to be zero, or whatever. It's like, I just wanted to give you the heads up so that you're not surprised and you can get ready.
Yeah. Where does boundaries and people pleasing, because it sounded like there was a little bit of that in that story that you just shared.
Yeah, as we're growing up, we each have a style. Some of it might be what we're born with, and some of it is going to be influenced by the role models in our family. But I like the Karpman drama triangle that kind of looks at 3 basic styles. And so one is more controlling, take charge. That has its place. Another is more people pleasing, rescuing. And another style is more passive, more compliant. So none of these is completely wrong. But at the beginning, I talked about when you always are operating in one way, then you are not using the flexibility to have wisdom. So if you tend to be compliant, then you're going to have to work on saying no, recognizing that other people need to learn how to take care of themselves. They need to become more responsible. They need to learn how to get their own sense of direction from the Lord. And you're not responsible to be their therapist, their rescuer. If you tend to be a leader, then there are times you need to be able to let other people learn how to exercise their gifts, learn how to make decisions, and be more of the follower. So the passive is more like you let everybody run your life. You kind of do whatever other people want. Women can easily fall into that. And if you have any history of trauma, it becomes very easy to either be overly controlling and taking the lead, or the other extreme where you are overly compliant, let other people kind of direct things. And so each of us needs to work on finding balance, and our boundaries will be healthier. But I think sometimes that is a useful way to think about, where does your personality tend to go?
Yeah, that's good. That's that self-awareness piece, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, diving into that. That's good. So we often hear, there's healthy boundaries and there's unhealthy boundaries. So when does like a healthy boundary cross that line into being unhealthy? And if it does cross that line, is there a way that that can be reversed?
So, like I said, a healthy boundary versus an unhealthy boundary, you're always operating in the same mode all the time. But the other thing that you're describing is something changes in a relationship. I start to feel taken advantage of. I get confronted that the other person feels like I'm being too bossy, or something changes where we need to reevaluate. So at that point, we need to think about, what are my expectations for this person? Do I need to accept their input that maybe I'm giving too much advice? I hear this all the time from people who have adult children. They want to still give them advice. They usually don't want it, and they usually don't take it. If it's not appreciated, it's not wanted, why are we doing that?
Mm-hmm.
We're not staying in our lane. We have
Yeah.
crossed their boundaries. But if I also notice that I'm being taken advantage of, I'm not being appreciated, I don't have time to take care of me, then that's where I need to think through, what do I need to do to simplify this, to draw a better boundary, to just do more self-care, put things in balance. We've talked about money. Maybe
Mm-hmm.
there's a person that calls you all the time, texts you all the time. They're always in crisis. So at some
Mm-hmm.
point you figure out they live in crisis, and
Mm-hmm.
they may or may not be taking your input. So at that point, you need to decide, how available am I going to be? Or
Mm-hmm.
an ex that hounds you. You don't have to pick up the phone. You don't have to respond. You can wait. So these are simple ways where we take charge in a healthy way of our time, our availability, our affections, because if we burn ourselves out, we're no good to anybody.
Right.
And we're supposed to live in a state of peace as much as possible. And so when someone else is taking my peace, or they tell me I'm messing up their peace, then we want to kind of think about, okay, what's happening here? What adjustment might I need to make with this person or in this situation, so that I can be at peace, and that as best I can, I'm at peace with others. But people aren't always going to like the boundaries you set. Sometimes people are going to give us a little backlash. That
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean you're wrong, and that you have to be careful, because a lot of people go into guilt. Oh, maybe I'm not being fair. Maybe,
Yeah.
it's like, you need to respect yourself. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. And you don't need to get into a real emotional conversation about, well, you're taking all my money, or I wish I was, this or that. It's like, don't get into the drama.
Yeah.
Just stick to very simple. Yes, that's going to be hard for you. I understand. But don't change your position.
So good. So you mentioned peace in there, and I've had to set some boundaries. There's two boundaries that I've set in my life, and one is I'm very, very particular about the groups that I associate, like social media groups and things like that. And the other one that I do is man, I don't watch a lot of news anymore. I quit watching news because I was finding that, especially in the mornings, I would turn on the news to see what was going on in the world. Got to stay up to date, on the world things, and I would either become anxious or frustrated or angry. I mean, never anything positive. My reaction was never positive, and so I'm almost to the point where I feel like I'm not educated on what's going on around me, because I've set that boundary so strict,
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think we have to be careful there too, right?
Absolutely. So I also put limits on how much news I consume. I have found places that I feel are more balanced. And so I feel like as Christians, we need to know something of what's going on, and then we can pray about it.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes God will invite us to do something about it. But yeah, it's you have to know what your tolerance is. And I have found there's certain channels I don't watch because I'm ready to, lose my mind. And
Yeah.
you, as believers, we have discernment. We should have discernment. The Holy Spirit gives us discernment. This is wrong. This is not right. This is not good for me. This is not good for anybody. And so we don't want to force ourselves to engage in things extensively that are going to rob us of our peace, that are keeping something negative going. And
Mm-hmm.
I find this is a mistake people make a lot, is they feel like, well, I should be tolerant of everything and everybody. The Bible doesn't teach that. Now, that doesn't mean we get in people's faces because we don't agree with their politics or their lifestyle. We can still be loving, but we need to know what is right and what is wrong. And that is discernment, where we're told to be wise as serpents. So that means we need to know what's going on. There are many places in the Bible where we're told to make a difference between the clean and the unclean, between what is useful and what is a waste of time. I recently was studying those verses in my quiet time, and they're in the Old Testament, they're in the New Testament. And one verse I have prayed for myself, Viv, is Psalm 90, verse 12, that says, to help me to number my days so that I can present to you a heart of wisdom. So numbering our days is knowing how to use our time, knowing what is my priority and what is too much. And sometimes it's not a bad thing, but we only have so much time. So I'm going to say maybe you want to try pickleball, because then you get exercise and then you make new friends and you don't get into people's drama too much because you're playing a game.
That is wonderful advice. I think I'm going to receive that and take that.
Well, that's part of why I do it.
Yes. No, it's really good.
Oftentimes we can ask the Lord for a strategy. Okay, I see this as a problem. What do I need to do? And you may get a creative solution, and then you just start using that to guide what you're doing, so that you're not always in conflict or having these come to Jesus talks with people. That is really annoying.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you've already talked a little bit, and maybe you have some more ideas, but what is scripture talking to us about when we talk about boundaries? What does it say?
Be wise as a serpent and innocent as a dove. I go back to that over and over. We need to know kind of who we're dealing with. And if you have to deal with the person who maybe is not always kind or conscientious, who has maybe motives and agendas that we don't like, we need to know that when we go into the situation. We're not necessarily going to confront the person about it, but I use the example of family gatherings for this. So a lot of times when people go home for a holiday, there are certain relatives they dread, because they know those relatives are going to be confrontational, or they're going to get in your business to something you don't want to talk about, or they're just cruel in different ways. So if you go in with your strategy, I'm only going to talk about these topics, or I'm only going to stay for 1 hour, or I'm only going to sit with this person and I'm not going to go in this part of the, little cliques, that is a way to be wise as a serpent, to be innocent as a dove, that I know what works and what doesn't, what's going to be a problem and what isn't. And then I go in with my game plan and I just stick with it, because we're not going to change other people by more conversations, confrontations, begging, crying, threatening. Those don't work. And so we need to figure out, where do I need to be at a place of peace? And then what do I need to do to make that happen? And most of the time, you don't need to explain that to anybody else. And most of the time, people aren't even going to ask.
Yeah, that's really good. Oh, this has been such a great conversation, and I would love for you, as we come to a close today, to give a word or two of encouragement for maybe those listeners who are struggling with setting boundaries. They've listened to what you said today, and they're like, I love what she's saying, but how do I do this? How do I start?
Well, I would say start small. Start where you're comfortable. Start with what's easy for you, that like, this is one thing I could do. I could maybe not answer the phone every time it rings. I could take more time. Another thing that I encourage people to do in terms of starting small is, when people ask you, where do you want to go? Where do you want to eat? If you're the kind of person that always says, oh, I don't care, you can say, well, I would like to, Mexican or Italian. it's not an order. It's just information. You're not forcing anybody, but the more that people start to gently move into territory that they haven't used, then that becomes more comfortable. And then as you become comfortable with one step, then you take the next step. And so it becomes part of who you are. But you want to add to your toolbox and start small. You don't have to make big changes, and start with the people that probably aren't going to give you a ton of grief.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Those that are a little bit closer to you, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's really good. Oh, thank you so much. So how can our audience reach you? I know you've got some books and you've got some resources. So how might they get in touch with you and get all the things?
So if you go to my website, that's the easiest way to see all my different media. I do have a number of books. I have one on anxiety, depression, and helplessness that talks a lot about boundaries and confidence. So my website is drtonycooper.com, drtonycooper.com, and that will show you all my YouTube videos, my books, my audiobooks, my media. You can find everything there.
Well, we are going to make sure we have all of that listed in the show notes. And listeners, I certainly hope that you will go check Dr. Cooper's resources out and get in touch with her. And thank you so much for joining me today and talking about boundaries. I hope that you all who are listening and watching have been able to take a few nuggets out of this conversation.
This is Dr. Tony Cooper, and this is Life Without Baggage. Thanks for listening. Follow the link in the show notes to find my book, Anxiety, Depression, and Helplessness, Keys to Break Free, my audiobooks, and my other media. Talk to you next time.